Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, where we talk about everything Orlando Magic. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we are going to break down further reactions to the Orlando Magic's splash trade for Desmond Bane, some thoughts around some of the casualties that were created due to the high-ticket signing that brought in another $30 million a year player, a comparison between Desmond Bane and some of the other options that could have been picked up with a similar package, and we have to continue our perfect prospect series. So let's start off with Gilbert Arenas and his initial reaction to this trade. He said the Magic didn't get fleeced. They're just dumb. He went on to say that most teams, if you look at some of the most recent champions, the actual example he went with was the Boston Celtics. He says teams like the Celtics use unprotected first round picks to be able to do things like go after a Jaylen Brown at the third overall pick, or trade down from the first overall pick in order to acquire Jason Tatum, right? They position themselves utilizing their unprotected picks to continue to build with top level talent, as opposed to the Orlando Magic in this situation where they traded a handful of unprotected picks all at one singular time, mortgaging their future essentially for Desmond Bane. What is Gilbert Arenas trying to say, and what should your initial thoughts be to something like this? I think Gilbert is explaining something that a lot of people would point out from the very beginning, which is Desmond Bane worth, multiple first round picks, and then you throw on top of that two rotational players in Cole Anthony and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? That would be the first question that we all have to ask: is Desmond Bane even worth that amount? Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? A lot of people have believe that the negative ramifications of the Mikal Bridges trade are going to significantly hurt not only the New York Knicks in terms of trying to make a trade acquisition for Kevin Durant, or of course anytime they've been in the news for Giannis Antetokounmpo, but it's going to put them in a position where they're going to have to look at some of their main guys and maybe even have to do some cap flexibility moves to get off of dudes that they like in their rotation in order to make themselves a lot more affordable. That's the casualty of war of a Karl Anthony Towns. Will you be starting to look at guys like Josh Hart on the roster and wondering whether or not you'll have to move off them to create more cap flexibility, right? A similar thing could be said here for the Orlando Magic. Of course, their main four guys are already lined up: Paolo, Franz, Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, right? Perfectly set. They're set for the next, let's say, at least next 3 years with the way the contracts are signed up, considering the fact that Paolo Banchero is going to sign an extension this summer, more than likely. This puts them in a situation where this is the team they're committing to being championship caliber. This is the team they're saying, with this squad, we are ready to be in the mix for the top of the Eastern Conference. We are ready to be where the Indiana Pacers are, as not only a team that competed in the finals, but has now came to back-to-back Eastern Conference finals with a chance to be able to raise the Larry O'Brien trophy, right? You're committing yourself to a long-term roster of saying, like, these guys are going to grow together, they're going to build, this offense is going to expand, and we're going to be one of those teams at the top of the East that people are going to have to worry about moving forward. Gilbert doesn't believe that. And in some cases, understandably so. And I think a lot of Magic fans are kind of in between when you think about some of the other players that could be acquired with this same kind of pick structure and same kind of trade structure in general. And we're going to go through a couple of those guys over the next couple of days. We're going to talk about a handful of guys, even one today that was in conversation, and ask ourselves the question of, would you rather Desmond Bane or some of these other dudes that were in the mix for this spot with this kind of trade package? And lo and behold, the biggest positive out of this is, despite the fact that they gave so many first-round picks, they didn't move off of Jonathan Isaac. They didn't move off of Goga Bitadze. So they still have that flexibility to take two guys like that, or even a Wendell Carter Jr., and create even more cap flexibility for themselves, while maybe still building out a little bit of the depth that they need at the shooting guard position, expanding their three-point shooting ability from the forward spots, things of that nature, right? So they're in a really interesting spot. I understand where Gilbert Arenas is coming from, and as Magic fans, everyone's of course hoping like that he's wrong, that Desmond Bane is the missing piece, that he is the biggest cog that's necessary to add to the three-point shooting, along with another solid set of draft picks, and maybe, really just like a structured offense that allows for more fluid mobility from the other guys outside of Paolo Banchero and Franz when it comes to creating their own shots, right? These are the kind of things that you hope that Desmond Bane unlocks. The flip side is, you're going to be not in the mix for, top level talent in the draft for the next couple of seasons We'll have to see. Desmond Bane is going to have to be a borderline all-star CJ McCollum type contribution, if not better, for this to be worth the kind of haul that was swung. And now, hey, let's throw it like this. The New York Knicks were in the Eastern Conference Finals after acquiring Mikal Bridges. Granted, they got Karl-Anthony Towns as well, but the year prior, they were not there. They lost in the second round. And this season, they get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they're only a handful of games away from being in the NBA Finals playing up against the OKC Thunder instead of the Indiana Pacers. Could the Orlando Magic with an un-injury-riddled season be in a similar pocket, especially given the status of the Eastern Conference going into next year? Highly likely. But, part of the juice coming with the squeeze also has to do with some of the other things that got shed in the process. That's Gary Harris and Corey Joseph. Now, that was understood that was going to be a part of the situation in order for them to continue to keep themselves under the second apron. The combination of Gary Harris and Corey Joseph added up to about $11 million in club options. The team elected not to pick up those. Now, granted, Gary Harris, not necessarily been the beacon of health, per se, for this Orlando Magic team, but it's kind of been a staple of their team as a veteran presence, a guy who can be defensive wing, can shoot the three ball at a high clip when healthy, all those things. Corey Joseph gives you a steady hand, kind of like a watered-down version of what you expect from like a Fred VanVleet offensively, not nearly as good defensively, right, but a guy that can give you secondary ball handling, so on and so forth. Of course, you understand that in the big picture, these are the kind of moves that are going to come with acquiring a guy that brings this much to your team, specifically from a cap space perspective, when you also look at the fact that 3 of your other pillars of your roster are already signed long-term, or in Paolo Banchero's case, going to be signed long-term. Now, did the Orlando Magic necessarily lose anything significant here by missing out on Gary Harris? Not necessarily. In my personal opinion, I don't necessarily think there was anything that was hurting them by missing out on those 2 guys. Yes, I will say that these are 2 dudes that give them positional flexibility at the point guard and shooting guard positions. Gary Harris also has the ability to play small ball 3 in certain situations. He's going to be a guy that I think is going to be well coveted on the free agent market as maybe a veteran minimum guy. I wouldn't be surprised if a team like the Lakers, I wouldn't be surprised if a team like his old stomping grounds with the Denver Nuggets, right? I would not be surprised if those kind of offers came to a Gary Harris. Honestly, there were times in the past where the Orlando Magic had real opportunity to sell, not necessarily high, but sell at quality value for what Gary Harris does provide when healthy. Now, of course, they're not able to do that in this situation, but they are able to do this. They are able to do something by shedding that $11 million. It gives them the situation where now they're back closer towards floating around being beneath or right above the first apron, as opposed to being so narrowly close to the second apron, which is, of course, the team structure that nobody really is favoring right now. And the teams that are in that space are the ones that are sweating the most this offseason about having to move some of their key contributing pieces. So, big casualty of war. You guys let me know. Was Gary Harris a guy that was a big loss in this situation? Do you feel like losing Gary Harris was worth what was gained and what Desmond Bane brings to the team? I mean, Desmond Bane does have a better health track record. They're kind of similar in terms of their ability to knock down the 3 ball at a high clip. I think Desmond Bane has a lot better on-ball creation than Gary Harris. Gary's probably a better defender, right? He's probably a little bit more seasoned, but I would also say on the other side, Desmond Bane has had to be a top 3 player on his team as part of a playoff team. Gary Harris has been on playoff rosters, and he's been a high-level contributor on playoff teams, but has never necessarily had to shoulder the load in the way that the Magic were able to obtain from a guy like Desmond Bane. You guys let me know, was losing Gary Harris and Corey Joseph a big hit in the process of this? I think that it was worth what was needed to be done, especially when you give the fact that even if they didn't go after Desmond, they were looking for point guard help in some way, shape, or form. And a combination of Gary Harris, Corey Joseph, and or Mo Wagner were all going to have to be in question long-term on this roster, right? So you guys let me know in the comment section if you think that Gary Harris in particular, because I think he's probably the biggest contributor of the 2 that were lost in this club option drop. But You guys let me know if that was a bigger hit than maybe I'm leading it off to believe, or if it's one of those things where, hey, that's just what comes with the game, and Desmond Bane was definitely worth the move. On the other side of the things, though, we talked about at the top of the show, there's a bunch of players in conversation now that the Desmond Bane trade has went through. There's a handful of players that's names are shooting up at the top of boards as the Orlando Magic could have gotten this player with that package instead of Bane, right? So over the next couple of days, we're going to go through a handful of those players on that list, because it was a rangy amount of them, from forwards and centers to shot creating point guards to guys that could dribble, shot penetrate. Like, there was a lot of different archetypes of guys that have been brought up over the last couple of days as players that could have garnered a similar return, and some debate would be better. Some would say would be on par, and others would say maybe Desmond Bane was the move in comparison to those. And the player we're going to start with is Anthony Simons, right? Anthony Simons, more of a true combo guard as well, about 6'4", 6'5", in a position where I would say him and Desmond are built very similar in terms of structure, in terms of size and structure. I would say Desmond Bane's a little bit burlier, obviously better built for defense. Anthony Simons easily right there with his mentor in Damian Lillard as one of the worst perimeter defenders in the league, especially at the guard position, as opposed to Desmond Bane, who's probably a better upside player on that side of the ball, right? Both of them shoot about 37 to 38% on average from beyond the arc on high volume. Anthony Simons probably takes more threes at clip than Desmond. I think Anthony Simons was averaging on like around 7 to 9. Desmond floated closer to about 7 as his career high. Anthony Simons, a little bit more athletic, a lot more ability to get around the basket and finish at a high level. I think he's probably a little bit better of a shot creator individually. I wouldn't say he's much of a great point guard fit, although he's a combo guard. I don't think he's a great point guard fit. So I think that he can play point guard if you need him to be a spark plug off the bench and give you points in high clips, kind of like what Cole Anthony has been in the past for the Orlando Magic. But is he your starting point guard? You have to question that. I think if you acquire Anthony Simons, you're more likely to put him at the 2, and you're putting the keys in Jalen Suggs' hands, saying he's the starting point guard in that situation. I think with Desmond Bane, there's a real conversation to be had about the idea of Desmond Bane being your starting point guard as opposed to having to forcibly give Jalen Suggs the keys. Now, I think that Jalen Suggs deserves to be the lead point guard with Desmond Bane all ball, but at least you have that flexibility to start him at the point guard position and feel comfortable about his distribution, as opposed to Anthony Simons, who I don't necessarily believe is a true one guard in any real way. I think he's a combo from the ability to guard from a size perspective multiple positions, but I don't necessarily think he's a guy who distributes the ball at a high enough level to be your point guard, if that makes any sense. In the end, the Anthony Simons trade package, right, has been something that's been rumored for, what's this now, 2 years at minimum, right? So the fact that this is now kind of like down the toilet, you have to ask yourself, which one would you rather have? The Florida-born kid in Anthony Simons, who gives you a lot of the offensive scoring punch, not nearly as good of a defender, but definitely has a higher upside as an offensive creator. I think Anthony Simons is a lot more likely to average 25, 26 points in an offense, even next to Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, as opposed to Desmond Bane, who might cap off as a 20 to 21 point per game scorer at his best, right? But I think that the defensive side of the ball matters so much more as well, right? The philosophy of the Orlando Magic over the last 2 seasons, and last year in particular, was huge. You could see it, especially even despite their injuries, that this team has a defensive philosophy behind Jamal Mosley where they want to be able to switch everything, guard multiple positions, avoid rim pressure, make it really tough for guys to finish around the basket, all of those things, right? Desmond Bane just does that in a real way that Anthony Simons doesn't provide. And so with that being the case, if this is the package I have to give up if this is the universal package, when we're talking about a handful of the different players that we're going to discuss over the next couple of days that the Orlando Magic could have gotten with this package, if this is what you had to do, I think you have a better chance of getting to where you're trying to go, if I'm the Orlando Magic front office, you have a better chance of getting where you're trying to go with Desmond Bane than with Anthony Simons, if this is the trade package that you're going with. If you're able to get a reduced package, right? Maybe you still give up Cole Anthony or KCP, or you give up Cole Anthony and KCP, but you only have to give up 1 or 2 first-round picks because of the fact that Anthony Simons is going to be an expiring contract and is going to require an extension, right? That changes things a little bit, especially when you give the fact that you do have to pay Anthony Simons as well, as opposed to Desmond Bane, who's locked up long-term. That's another thing that has to be weighed. The fact that Desmond Bane is under contract right now helps in a way that, compared to having to bring in Anthony Simons, now you've given Jalen Suggs an extension. Franz Wagner has gotten an extension. Paolo Banchero's up for an extension, and then Anthony Simons will be up for his extension the very following season. Very, very tough on the books for an Orlando Magic team that's still very, very young, right? So I think when you put all the pieces together and you think about it from not just the actual trade package perspective, the player archetype perspective, but also factor in the long-term play of what it's going to take contract-wise with both of these players, one already being under contract for the next couple of seasons, Anthony Simons being somebody that you're going to have to invest in after only about a season of seeing him in your uniform, in your organization. I think that Desmond Bane was the better play. Now, we move on to the final topic of the episode, and it's my favorite series. Y'all are going to love it all the way up until the NBA draft, and we're going to continue it a little bit past the NBA draft with a little bit of a twist later on. But for right now, we're going to go back to our series of the perfect pick for the Orlando Magic. And at pick 25, the player that I thought of that could be an interesting pick in that range is the Frenchman, 7'1" forward center from Stanford, Maxime Renaud. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking. We still need point guard help. We still need shooting from the guard position. Yes. You also need shooting in general. Remember, 22nd, 25th, 26th, 27th. That's been the area that the Orlando Magic have finished offensive rating-wise over the last 3 to 4 seasons. This team needs an offensive punch, and they've been dabbling in the wing position, right? And they've grabbed a handful of guards as well. But you look at Jet Howard, Anthony Black, Tristan da Silva last year. Anthony Black was standing, Jet Howard and Tristan da Silva in particularly. The goal was to add three-point shooting. Now, Jet Howard hasn't seen the floor nearly as much. I would say that partially is for good reason, but we'll discuss that in a different episode because we will be discussing, player season in reviews as we get kind of deeper into the actual off season, where there's a little less news and there's a lot more of just being able to reflect on this past season and set expectations for next season, right? But you look at the guys that you expect to be knocked out three-point shooters on this team. Jet Howard, when he plays. Jalen Suggs. Paolo Banchero has increased his three-point volume. I don't think we're at knockdown shooter yet. We're still floating around 35%. Franz Wagner is not a shooter by any means. We hope that he develops that. He's playing in FIBA this summer. Let's see if he kind of lets the stroke fly this summer and shoots the three ball a little bit higher at a clip during FIBA play. Maybe it can give us some encouragement that he has real potential, right, as a three-point shooter, because that's kind of the biggest hole in his game right now, is his ability to stretch the floor in any real way. Wendell Carter's not necessarily a real stretch 4, stretch 5. Jonathan Isaac can shoot the three ball, but not really a high enough volume guy to call him a stretch big. So there's no real stretch bigs on this team to create spacing around Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and so on and so on. Maxime Renaud, although he shot 35% from 3 this past season, he shot over 350. He took over 350 attempts this year. The volume is there. The guy can put the ball on the floor. He has good IQ, high-level vision, a dude who can put the ball on the floor and get to the basket at a high clip. Not a super athlete, but a guy who can play within the margins, play passing lanes. He's, like I said beforehand about him being a smart player, it also means that he makes good decisions, both in part of playing on zone and playing as a help defender behind guys in man-to-man situations in terms of switching. He's probably still more of a 4-5, right? A true 5 at 7'1", but can slide his feet enough to be able to rotate and guard forwards in certain situations. But the main thing is the floor spacing and the offensive creation that he provides. As part of Stanford, this guy averaged 20 and 10 last year. Was not necessarily a dominating big man, but a guy that could kind of get just about any and every shot he was looking for. The game where he stood out to me was when they played, I believe they played California in the Pac-12 tournament. And, I mean, he just seemed to be getting anything and everything that he wanted. Top of the key, a trailer three, bang. On the low block, step back, jumper, bang. Off the low block, turn around the basket, finish at the basket with a lay and one, cash. Like, just a guy that I think has a real offensive upside to him where, like, he could be like, I think the upside of him, and I think this is a very high-level contributing player in this today's version of the NBA, I think the ceiling for him is the version of what Brook Lopez was in the championship year for the Milwaukee Bucks. High-level three-point shooter, splash mountain, shooting 38+% from beyond the arc on at least, 6 to 7 attempts per game. High-level rim defender, can still get to the low block and make offensive possessions his own if you want to run a couple plays through him off the bench, right? And he gives you a push as another high-level forward, because we also have to think about the fact that Jonathan Isaac, he's only going to be like a 60 to 70 game a year guy if he's also playing like 18 to 20 minutes a game. Let's be honest. Max. So we also have to bolster up that forward position. And given the fact that Goga Bitadze is going to be a name that probably is going to be in a lot of trade conversations, as well as Wendell Carter Jr., I think Mo Wagner, his spot is safe. Jonathan Isaac, for now, I would say, seems like he's going to be an Orlando Magic lifer. Still kind of need to add that one more depth piece to kind of fill things out. More specifically at the center position, he could be your absolutely certified stretch big. He could be the guy that you, out of all the three that you keep, or whatever variation, Goga Bitadze, Wendell Carter, Jonathan Isaac, he can be a guy that you can maintain a certain level of defensive infrastructure, but also have a true three-point shooting big, a la the Brook Lopez, a la Al Horford with the Boston Celtics. But with that being the case, this is another episode of the Magic Latest Podcast. You guys let me know, is Maxime Reynard a perfect pick at 25 if he is there for the taking? Is there a different prospect you guys think the Orlando Magic should consider instead of Maxime Reynard? Let me know in the comment section down below. But until next time, peace.